I'm sharing 5 of the most common mistakes that painters make, and the 5th one is a mistake that pretty much everyone makes. Now, mistake number 1 is all about not focusing on value above everything else. And by value, I mean how light and dark the various areas in your painting are. It's essential to have clear light and dark values in your work because otherwise you won't have any sense of light. Now, you could have the most beautiful colors in the world in your painting, but if you don't have clear light and dark values, then it's just going to fall flat. Now, as an example, let's take a look at this painting by Vermeer. And because our eyes can see value more clearly in black and white than in color, I'm putting a black and white filter over the painting. And notice how incredibly clear the light, medium, and dark values in the painting are. Vermeer absolutely focused on value, as the painting would not have such a clear sense of light if he didn't. So no matter what level you are at, this is something you always want to focus on in your work above everything else. Mistake number 2 is taking a painting way too seriously and being afraid of ruining it. Now, way back in art school, in one of my first painting classes, I remember working really hard on a painting and getting quite attached to it and really liking what was happening, but then becoming afraid of ruining the painting. My teacher was brilliant and saw through that and pointed out how my fear was really keeping me from moving forward and actually making a good painting. We have to be willing to make mistakes, ruin paintings, because it takes making many paintings to really grow, learn, and develop. Now, of course, every painting you create, you want to be the best painting you've ever made, and we often sometimes see it as, oh, this is gonna be a masterpiece. But in doing so, and in thinking that way, you become attached to that painting and you become afraid to make a mistake. And doing that really sets yourself up for failure because it's so important to allow yourself to really experiment and just kind of go after the painting and just go all out and just doing everything that you can and not be afraid to make a mistake. And when we do make mistakes, we learn from them, and it's so important to fail and make mistakes because there's no other way that you will grow. So whenever you're painting, don't worry about how your painting is or isn't turning out. Just focus on the process. It's all about the process. And then when you do that, your painting will turn out. Now, mistake number 3 is very common. And it is when you paint and see your subject as an object instead of as shapes of color and light. Now, what does that actually mean? So for example, let's say you're going to paint an apple. You put an apple on a table and you set up your easel and everything and you're going to paint it. And you tell yourself, okay, cool, I'm painting an apple. But instead of actually observing and looking at all the spots of color that are next to one another and the particular kind of light that is on the apple and the shadows that are there, you paint what you think in your mind is an apple. You paint what you are imagining in your head. So you're not painting what you see, but rather what you think you see. So because of that, your paintings then will end up looking dull and uninteresting because you're not capturing the really captivating and exciting colors that are right there in front of you. And the way to get away from that is to see everything in terms of spots of color. And there really isn't any way around that. All the old masters painted in this way, they thought in this way, and this is how the language of painting works. It works in terms of seeing and painting in spots of color. Now, I have some free resources below, linked below, that you can check out to learn more about that. Now, the 4th mistake is something that can be very common among beginners, and that is making your cast shadows too dark in value. So, this is a mistake that I made when I was beginning painting in some of my first painting classes, and it's a mistake that I really see very often among my beginning painting students. One of my instructors would call these holes, and that really has stuck with me because it is such a good visual of what this looks like. So when you make a cast shadow too dark, it looks like it's just a hole in the ground, and it isn't this kind of flat surface like you really want it to feel like. So when you're making cast shadows, really aim after making it feel like an actual surface and not a hole. Now, mistake number 5 is a mistake that almost everybody makes. It's very common. It's one that I struggle with all the time. I see it in my students all the time. It's very common. And that is not simplifying enough. Now, this is a problem and mistake that will always follow you because it's really hard to shake off that tendency to get into detail. And I think some struggle with that more than others. And of course, those that really love that detail, of course, it will be harder for. It really helps, though, to understand the reasons of why it's absolutely necessary to simplify. And it really comes down to the fact that with our eyes, we see an absolutely enormous range of light. So coming from the really, really bright light to something very incredibly dark. And that range is absolutely enormous. Just think of how bright the sun is. And it's absolutely impossible to replicate that degree of brightness with our paints. And that's because the range of value that we have with our paints is extremely limited in comparison to the range of value that we have that we can see with our own eyes. So in order to work properly with the tools and materials that we have with our paints, we have to simplify. There's no other way around it. So we have to teach ourselves to see like a painter, to see like an artist, and learn how to group values together and to really simplify the colors and the values that we see in front of us. Now, if this is a struggle of yours, there's an exercise that will really help you to get better at simplifying. Set up a still life or whatever it is you would like to paint and force yourself to group the values that you see in your subject into just 3 values. So group them into light, medium, and dark values. You can do this in black and white or color, but I do recommend first doing this in black and white because simplifying values in color is much more difficult than black and white because it's more difficult to see values clearly in color versus black and white. I also have some free resources linked below that will help you to understand more about simplifying in painting. Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, be sure to leave those below. I always love hearing from you and I read all of the comments. I'll see you in the next video.